Hello everyone, welcome to 901 Woodworking. I'm Huibert Mees, and today we're going to use the CNC machine to make this sign. This sign is for a company owned by a friend of mine, and he asked me to make this sign out of a wine barrel lid. Now, the first thing we need to do to make a sign out of a wine barrel lid is to find a suitable lid. Here's one that I've picked out. The first thing you need to know about these wine barrel lids is that they are not all constructed the same way. I've found about 3 different ways that these barrel lids are made, but in all cases, the staves that make up the lid are loose. They are not glued together, and we need to connect them together and glue them together to make a solid piece before we can start milling a sign. Now, the different ways that these barrel lids are made is in the way that these pieces of the top are connected together. In some cases, they are joined with metal pins that align the pieces and hold them together. That's the type of lid you don't want to use, because there might be a chance that you cut deep enough into this piece that you might hit one of those pins, and that would destroy your bit. The other way is that there are wooden dowels that are used to hold them together. Now, a wooden dowel won't hurt the bit if you hit it, but having a dowel that is partially visible and within the carving wouldn't look very nice. So I don't use those either. The third kind, which is the kind I have here, is pieces that are put together with kind of like a tongue and groove pattern. You can see how this tongue and groove pattern locks the pieces together. This is the type of lid that you want to use. And the first thing you want to do is to take the lid apart so you can glue it together again. To get these apart, I use a chisel and a mallet. I just work in the gaps and slowly knock the pieces apart. Sometimes the pieces are fairly tight together, but work from the back side so that if you do damage any of the wood, it's going to be on the back side of the piece and not in the front where you're more likely to see it. All right, now that the pieces are all apart, it's time to glue them together. Now we need to make sure that when we glue them together, the whole thing stays flat. So we'll use a couple cauls and a lot of clamps to do that. So I've gathered up my cauls and my clamps. I'm ready to go. I'm just using 2x4s as cauls here, and I've run them through a joiner to make sure that one surface is perfectly flat. The other thing I have here are 2 clamps that are shaped about the right diameter of the part. First thing I'll do, put some wax paper over the wood so that it doesn't stick, because you're going to get a fair bit of squeeze out of glue and you don't want the barrel top sticking to your cauls. Make sure you line these up correctly. Once you get these in place, they're not moving again. Once you have all the pieces glued up and set on the cauls, you need to set this middle one, and I use 2 large C-clamps for that. Otherwise, these edges will curl up and they won't be flat. Next, I add a lot of clamps all around to clamp the whole top down to my cauls. Lastly, we use some pipe clamps to bring it all together. Now, while this is drying, we need to go into the computer to create the file that we're going to machine into this barrel top. And it starts with an image of the logo that I received from the client. Okay, the first thing we need to do is look at the file that the client gave us to see what format it's in and to see what it actually looks like. In this case, the client gave me this file. So this is the logo that we are going to be machining into our barrel lid. And here you can see the two colors, the black for the dividing strips and the bottom text, as well as the maroon for the logo and the middle text. Now, pulling this into Fusion 360 will be a problem if we have this in multiple colors. So what we need to do is first convert this into black and white. The other thing is that this is a PNG file, so there are a lot of pixels in there. And Fusion 360 needs vector data to pull in. So we have to first convert this into black and white, and then we have to convert it into vectors. And we will be using two pieces of software for that. The good news here is that both of these pieces of software are free and easily downloadable on the internet. The first one is a program called GIMP, and this is what we will use to convert the file to black and white. So let's take our file, drop it into GIMP. Here you see the file in the two different colors. In order to convert this into black and white, what we do is go into Colors and then Threshold. You take this slider and you slide it along this range here until everything turns to black and white. Once you have it into black and white, hit OK, and now we will export the file as a PNG. And I like to add the word GIMP in there so I know what the file came out of. Export. And now we have our file exported. The next thing we want to do is we want to go into a program called Inkscape. In Inkscape, we're going to find the GIMP output file that we just created. We're going to drop that into the program. Click OK for accepting the defaults. And there you have the logo loaded. Now what we need to do is we need to convert this into vectors. And the way you do that is with the path command and then trace bitmap. The defaults here are all acceptable to us at this point, so hit apply. And now it looks like it didn't do anything, but it actually did. If you grab this top image, you can pull it over and you see that we now have two images. And if we zoom into this image, you can see how the one side is very pixelated, while the new file we created, or new image, is very sharp. This is the vector image, this is the PNG file. So if we go back, what we can now do is delete the PNG and just save the vector image. Go to File, Save As, and let's save this as our ink file. And we will name it ink. That way we know what that file came out of. That's the end of the processing we have to do on these files. So now let's get into Fusion 360 and create a model of our barrel lid that we can then pull the logo into. I know our barrel lid is about 540 millimeters in diameter. So let's start off by creating a circle of that diameter. Finish the sketch. And then let's extrude that to some thickness. Now the actual thickness doesn't matter here. What does matter is that it's at least 5 millimeters or greater than 5 millimeters thick, because we're going to be carving into the piece by 5 millimeters. So we'll make it 20 millimeters thick. Now we have our disc. In order to pull our logo in, we go into Insert, Insert SVG, and we'll navigate to our file. Click on our file. Select the plane that we want to load it onto, which is the top surface of our solid. And now you can see here how the logo is there. It's very small and it's upside down, so let's rotate it into correct orientation. And we can start expanding the size. And this is a iterative process. It's not, there's no science here. You just do something that you think looks good. Leave a little space for a border to go around it, which we'll draw in a second. But that looks pretty good. Make it just a little bit larger. Recenter it there. Now the last thing we need to do is create our border. So we'll draw another circle centered on the center of the part, and something like that should be good. Finish sketch. Now we have our sketch sitting on top of our solid. The next thing we need to do is create the depressions, or create the three-dimensional aspect of the sign. So for that, we choose the parts that we want to push back or depress. Once we have these all selected, we can then extrude and go -5 millimeters. Now you see how the letters are now sitting proud of the surface of the barrel top, and we have a border surrounding everything. This is what we will now machine. The next step is we still need to have some more information, because we know that parts of this are maroon and parts of this are going to be black. So we need to know where to paint those colors. And this is where I'll give you a tip on how to do this, because you could machine this out as is and then very carefully paint each of these letters the appropriate color. But there's an easier way to do this, and that is to paint this barrel top before you do the carving. That way you will carve away all of the overpaint, and you will only be left with the bits that you need to have painted, and there won't be any spillover of paint along the edges of the letters. It will be extremely neat. But it does mean that you need to know beforehand exactly where to paint black and where to paint the maroon. So the way to do that is we need to draw a couple lines on this part that tells us what areas we need to paint what color. So we need to draw a couple lines. And what we'll do is draw a line that go in between the areas of color. We know this area up here with the logo is going to be maroon. This line or this stripe is going to be black. These letters are going to be maroon again, and this line is black, and then these areas or these letters will be maroon. Also, the border is going to be black. So let's draw some lines. Dividing those areas up. And exactly where you draw the lines is not important. Now we need to know how far apart these lines are. Let's finish the sketch, and then we'll take some measurements. We'll measure this line here. I know goes right through the center of the part, so it's easy to figure out where that one goes once I have the piece in front of me. But these other lines are not quite so straightforward, so I'll measure down to either one of them, all of them, and write down the measurements that I get. The next thing we need to do is create the tool paths. So we go into our manufacture and we create a new setup. Personally, I like to have the origin in the center of these setups. I find it easy to locate the part that way. We are going to have to find the center of this part anyway in order to draw the circle that outlines where we need to paint the black for the border. So we will know where the center of the piece is, and we can locate the piece on the CNC machine using that center very accurately. So that's why I like to have the origin here in the center. I don't need any extra stock on top, but the default settings otherwise work fine for me. Now, for something as complex as this, what I like to do is rough out the major portion of the machining with a 1/2" bit, leaving 2 millimeters of stock all around. And that's a adaptive clearing. The tool is a 1/2" end mill. Select the large portion here. There's no point selecting in between the letters because a 1/2" tool is too big to go in there anyway. Stock to leave, we'll make this 2 millimeters on the radial side. Axially, I want 0 millimeters. I want it to go all the way full depth, but I want to leave 2 millimeters all around the edges of all of the letters. Make sure we're doing a climb cut, hit OK, and let it generate the toolpath. Okay, once we're done with the 1/2 inch bit pass, we switch to a 1/4 inch bit and we take away some more of the stock that the 1/2 inch bit has left behind. You can see here areas in here, the inside of the O, we could get rid of more material. A lot more material can come out of here. And you see there's areas where a smaller bit could take out more material. So let's switch to a 1/4 inch bit. We'll continue to do a 2D adaptive clearing. Select a 1/4 inch end mill. Select our main area as the working area. This time we'll also add the inside of the O, since I think a 1/4 inch bit can take a fair bit of that material away. We'll choose rest machining so that it only removes the stock that's left over. And again, we will keep our 2 millimeter radial clearance stock to leave. Hit OK, and let's generate that toolpath. Next thing we're going to do is, staying with the 1/4 inch bit, this logo at the top and the outer circle can easily be finished, as well as these 2 black lines. They could be finish cut with a 1/4 inch bit. Do that by choosing 2D contour. The 1/4 inch end mill is still chosen, so now let's choose our contours. So we choose the logo contour, the outer circle, and let's choose these 2 lines. Stock to leave should be set to 0, so keep that off and then click OK. Now we'll again stick with the 1/4 inch bit and we'll clean up around these other letters. So again, we'll choose our 2D contour. Now we choose all of the contours at the bottom of these letters. Okay, this time we are going to leave some stock. We're going to leave 1 millimeter of stock. Again, only in the radial direction, not in the axial direction. I want to machine all the way down to the bottom of the pocket. Hit OK, and that's all of the work we will do with the 1/4 inch bit. The next thing we do is we switch to an 1/8 inch bit and we start doing the finish passes on the letters. Switch to an 1/8 inch down cut. This time we'll leave stock to leave off because we want to do a finish pass here. And again, we choose all of the contours of these letters. Hit OK. Well, that's all the work we have to do with the computer. I went into a fair bit of detail there, but these letters are quite complicated and there's a lot going on, a lot of toolpaths that have to be generated. But now our board is dry. Let's unclamp and see what we've done. Well, this is looking pretty good. A little bit of cleaning up with a chisel to get the squeeze out, and then we're ready to flatten the board. The first thing we're going to do is flatten the back side of this board on the CNC using a 1-inch flat end mill. That mill will give us a nice flat surface so that when we turn it over on the CNC, we're sitting on a nice flat surface, and we can then first do a flattening pass on the top side and then do our painting. Now that we have our board flattened and primed, we need to know where to paint the colors. So there are 2 colors involved. There's black and there's a maroon color. But we need to know exactly where to paint these so that they end up in the places where we need it. Now we know that there is a black ring all the way around the piece. There's a black stripe in the middle, and there's another black stripe lower down. In between are the maroon letters. So what we need to do is we need to draw some lines on this piece that indicate where we need to paint the various colors. Now, in order to make sure that we paint the black in the circle in the right spot, we need to draw a circle on the workpiece to tell us where to paint. To draw a circle, the first thing we need to know is where the center of that circle is. So to find the center of the circle in a piece like this is actually pretty easy. Let us use this jig that I made. All it is a right angle made out of a bit of 3/4 inch plywood, and then another piece at a 45-degree angle glued to it. So this line bisects this 90-degree angle. And what you do is you put the 90-degree angle bit up against the sides of your circle, and then you draw a line somewhere near the center. And you do this at least 4 positions around the circle. Like this. Now, if this jig were perfectly made, this was exactly at a 45-degree angle, and this piece was an exact circle, then this method would mean that all of your lines would intersect at the center in one point. But this jig is probably not perfect. This is not a perfect circle. So what you end up with is lines that don't cross each other perfectly in the center, but they get close enough that you can see, just like here, it's a little square. You can figure out where the center of that square is. It's pretty easy to do. Once we have a nail set in the center, take a tape measure and set it to the radius of the circle you want to draw. In this case, the radius is 9 3/4 inches. Set the tape measure up against the nail. Then with a pencil, you can just rotate around the nail and draw your circle. And you got to make sure that you keep pulling on the tape measure. As you see, I didn't do that here, and the circle kind of got out of place, but you can always go back and draw it again. There. Now our circle is drawn, and I can pull the nail out and draw the other lines. Okay, with the lines drawn, we can paint. Okay, now that we have the board painted, we can put it on the CNC machine. We're ready to start cutting. Now this is where having the center marked and with a little hole from our nail becomes even more important. The pattern that we're machining covers the entire board, so we want to make sure it is absolutely perfectly centered. So knowing where that point is very important. This is also why it's important to mark the origin in the computer at the center of the board. If we'd marked it at the bottom here where the corner of the stock was, we wouldn't be able to locate this board very well. But having it oriented right in the center of the board makes it pretty easy to locate the board accurately. And the way we do that is I've installed a 60-degree V-bit temporarily in the CNC, and we're going to use that to locate this hole right at the 0, 0. The CNC is sitting at 0, 0 right now. All we need to do now is bring the spindle down and line it up with that hole, and then the board will be centered at 0, 0. We just have to then worry about the rotational orientation, but we can do that visually. Now we have it centered. Now we can just visually rotate it until it looks like it's about parallel or perpendicular to the long axis of the machine. And when that's ready, we're ready to clamp up. With the board clamped up on the CNC mill, the first pass that we make is with the 1/2-inch end mill. So I've loaded up the 1/2-inch end mill, and now what we need to do is set the Z0 height. Now Z0 is set. Raise the bit up and install the dust collector. The first pass with the 1/2-inch bit is done, and most of the material is now gone. It's pretty rough, but that's okay. That's why we left that 2 millimeters of stock, so that we can now come back with finished passes with the 1/4-inch and the 1/8-inch end mills and really clean this all up. Well, here's the final result. I've added 2 coats of a polyurethane finish in a satin gloss, and I've also added a hook in the back, so this can easily be hung on a nail or a hook on the wall. Now, my friend did ask me to make 2 of these, and one of them I've put back into the end of the barrel. And I cut about 5 inches or so off the end of each stave, and then put them back around the top once it was completely finished, and added the top 2 rings from the barrel. Now, these rings are held in by screws just to make sure they don't come loose. This barrel is approximately, it's been out of use for approximately 2 years, I think. So the staves are nicely dried out. I don't expect them to move or shrink at all, so I don't expect these rings to come loose. But if you're using a barrel that has been fairly recently used and is, might still be wet on the inside from the wine, then expect these staves to dry out over time and shrink. And so if you don't use screws to hold these rings in place, they will come loose as the staves shrink just a little bit. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please hit that subscribe and notifications button, and we'll see you next time for more woodworking.